There are 998 Space Marine chapters in the Imperium of Man, whose lineage is written, indexed, and stamped with a founding number. And then there is one that isn't. They come out of the dark on the Eastern Fringe, black armor, black eyes, teeth filed to points, scars cut into their own flesh between battles. They win a war no one else could win, and then they are gone, back into the void, leaving no record of where they went or who sent them. The Administratum does not list their gene father. The Adeptus Mechanicus gene archives contain no confirmed lineage for the Carcharodons. The chapter's long absence from Imperial space and their failure to regularly tithe gene seed has left the official record with a gap. We are told they are a successor chapter of the Raven Guard. We are told a lot of things, but the Raven Guard don't eat their enemies. The Raven Guard don't refuse to give their own number to the High Lords of Terra, and the Raven Guard's gene seed does not carry the one marker that, in 10,000 years of Imperial record-keeping, has been deliberately scrubbed from every database, every gene bank, and every tongue. The marker of the Second Legion, the one the Emperor erased. The Carcharodons aren't hiding in the dark because they are outcasts. They are hiding in the dark because they are the answer to a question the Imperium executes people for asking. Before the case is laid out, a caveat is owed to the audience. Games Workshop has never confirmed the Carcharodons are the Second Legion. The connection rests on circumstantial evidence, behavioral anomalies, contested gene seed readings, and deliberate canonical ambiguity that GW has maintained since at least 1990. What follows is a forensic argument built from that evidence, not an announcement of confirmed fact. Every exhibit will be identified as such. The audience can weigh them. Now, the anomalies. Anomaly 1. The Void. The Carcharodons are a fleet-based chapter. No homeworld, no permanent base. Their operational structure, called the Nomad Predation Fleet, is an assemblage of warships that splits into independent hunter groups called shoals, each self-sufficient, each capable of operating without Imperial support for years or decades. The Imperial armor account of their appearance at the Badab War in 910, M41, describes a chapter that had been absent from settled Imperial space for, in their own words, centuries, perhaps millennia at a time. Their flagship is the battle barge Nikor. That ship submits no regular reports to anyone. Every confirmed Raven Guard successor maintains a fixed fortress monastery, catalogued in the Administratum's planetary registries. The Carcharodons appear in none of them. Void nomadism of this duration and completeness would be completely normal for a first founding legion that predates the Crusade-era convention of planetary assignment, something assembled before fixed bases were standard practice. Anomaly 2. The Armor. The Carcharodons carry war gear spanning the full 10,000-year history of the Imperium: Phobos, R017 pattern bolters, Mark V Heresy-era plate, relics from a dozen different periods. Unusual but explicable for a chapter with limited Forge World access. What isn't explicable is this. Their third company captain wears a suit of Mark III armor bearing an insignia of participation in the Terran pacification campaigns. The Terran pacification wars were fought before the Great Crusade, before legions were assigned homeworlds, before the roster of 20 was fully established. A chapter with a battle honor from that period can't be a post-heresy successor. It has to predate the heresy entirely. The Raven Guard weren't reunited with Corvus Corax until the Crusade was already underway. A Raven Guard successor chapter can't have fought at Terra's pacification. A legion that existed before Corax was found can. Anomaly 3. The Scars. The Carcharodons practice extensive ritual scarification. Swirling patterns cut into skin and sometimes worked onto armor before battle. The tradition draws on Maori Ta Moko practice, a connection that McNiven's 2017 novel Red Tithe was the first Black library text to explicitly name. No Raven Guard successor uses this practice. The Raven Guard's cultural aesthetic is shadow, corvid imagery, and silence. The Carcharodons' aesthetic is ocean predators and open scarred flesh and tribal marking systems that record what the warriors have done and who they are. For a chapter with no battle honors on any Imperial record, the scars are the only record that exists. Anomaly 4. The Blindness. The Carcharodons suffer from a combat condition they call the blindness, a state in which warriors lose all control and may attack their own. The Carcharodons' Astra Compendium states explicitly that their blood fury isn't like the nails of the World Eaters or the black rage of the Blood Angels. It's unique. That word matters. The nails are implanted cortex-shredding devices. The black rage is a documented gene seed pathology tied directly to Sanguinius. The Raven Guard have no documented berserker state at all. Their curse runs in a different direction entirely. If the Carcharodons' combat condition can't be explained by Raven Guard biology, and the record identifies it as unique to any known gene line, then the gene line that produced it hasn't yet been identified in any document the Imperium permits to exist. Anomaly 5. The Registration. Imperial Armour Volume 9 records the Carcharodons' founding as unknown. Their progenitor chapter, unknown. Their chapter number, unknown. The 2020 Index Astartes supplement produced the clearest official statement on this question. Though the Carcharodons are technically of an unknown founding, for all rules purposes, we suggest that the Carcharodons are considered to be a Raven Guard successor chapter. The gallery documentation calls them an alleged successor chapter of the Raven Guard, though this remains unconfirmed. Not confirmed, alleged, suggested for rules purposes. Every Space Marine chapter formed under any of the 26 foundings has a declared gene father. Traceability is a foundational requirement because gene seed integrity is the difference between a Space Marine and a monster. The Carcharodons have submitted insufficient samples to the Mechanicus across centuries of attempts. The Mechanicus knows almost nothing about their gene stock because the chapter has never consistently tithed. That isn't negligence. That is a policy. The only chapter for whom that policy would make sense is one whose true lineage, if examined carefully enough by the right analyst, would answer a question no one is sanctioned to ask. Before the gene line evidence goes on the table, the record must establish what Imperial erasure actually does, because the theory turns entirely on the gap between erasing a name and erasing a bloodline. Since 1990, when Realm of Chaos, The Lost and the Damned published the first complete official list of all 20 Space Marine legions, 2 entries have carried the same notation. Legions 2 and 11, listed by number, all other data marked as expunged. That notation has appeared in every legion list published since. The numbers exist, the data does not. The High Gothic term for this procedure is damnatio memoriale, condemnation of memory, an edict of obliteration. The companion process is called erasure, defined in lore as the systematic and remorseless destruction of every record, every monument, every mention of the condemned, until they become not figures in history but holes in it, absences where presence once had been. holes in it, not men killed. The procedure targets the concept, the name, the designation.
What it does not necessarily target, what the definition does not explicitly require, is the physical extermination of every warrior who ever carried the gene seed. No canonical source states the warriors of Legions 2 and 11 were killed. No source states they survived. The physical fate of the bloodline is left as one of the holes. The erasure was already in effect before the Horus Heresy. In the Heresy-era novels, Legions 2 and 11 are already expunged, their numbers gaps in the roster, their histories already gone. A Black Library short story titled The Chamber at the End of Memory places Rogel Dorn in proximity to the question of what can be remembered of the lost legions, though the exact nature of that confrontation is deliberately obscured. What matters about this isn't the specific scene, but the structural implication. The erasure required active maintenance. New references had to be found and destroyed. Memory had to be suppressed as it reconstituted in the minds of those who had served alongside the vanished. Magnus the Red carries what lore analysis describes as a memory scar spanning 927.m30 to 964.m30, a period of psychic excision corresponding to knowledge he was apparently not permitted to retain about forbidden events. The Emperor's own sons were having memories removed. Not just records, memories. This is the mechanism the theory requires. If erasure is name suppression and memory modification, not guaranteed physical extermination, then a gene line can survive while the name it carries is destroyed. Warriors can operate under different identities. They can build new mythologies to replace the ones that have been burned. And if the command structure understands what they are, and what happens to the Sons of the Forgotten when Imperial authorities find them, they can construct that new identity with the deliberate precision of people who know exactly what they are hiding from. Now the evidence goes on the table. Exhibit A is the official language. Every GW and Forge World publication that addresses the Carcharodons lineage uses hedging language. Unknown, alleged, unconfirmed, suggested for rules purposes. Never a declaration. 30 years of consistent ambiguity. GW has maintained this as a design choice, and the script running through all of it reads, "We can't tell you who they actually are." Exhibit B is the gene seed tithing gap. The Mechanicus holds too few samples to definitively classify the Carcharodons gene seed or confirm its progenitor. Every decade without a tithe is another decade in which no Magos biologist examines their gene stock in sufficient detail to find what might be hidden in it. The official explanation is that the gap is a logistical consequence of their long absence from Imperial space. An alternative explanation produces exactly the same outcome. Exhibit C is the counter-argument, and it must be stated honestly. Deathwatch analysis of a recovered Carcharodons gene seed sample found it severely degraded, but bearing many hallmarks of Ravengard gene seed, the heritage of Corax himself. This is the strongest canonical evidence against the Second Legion theory. It sits on the table beside everything else. But severely degraded raises a question the attribution doesn't answer. Degraded from what? Toward what? The Carcharodons are confirmed in their lore to have taken recruits from captured worlds across millennia, and their novels establish they have accepted gene seed from multiple sources during resupply exchanges. A single compromised sample from a chapter that has been hybridizing and regenerating its gene stock from available material for 10,000 years, using whatever it could find to replace losses, will carry the genetic signatures of whatever populations it has absorbed most recently. The core of an original gene line, deeply buried and progressively diluted, might not fully express itself in a single degraded sample. The evidence is real.
The interpretation isn't closed. Exhibit D is the blindness. the unnamed combat trance that the compendium explicitly distinguishes from every other known gene seed pathology. Not the black rage, not the butcher's nails, something unique. The Raven Guard have no documented berserker condition, a unique, unnamed pathology in a chapter whose gene line is officially unconfirmed, is consistent with an original gene seed that was never publicly catalogued, because the legion that produced it was erased before the record could document its flaws. Exhibit E is written into the flesh of their oldest warriors. Chief Librarian Te Kahurangi, the oldest member of the chapter, described in the Lexicanum as descended from the wandering ancestors, develops denticle growths on his elbows and around his neck, a condition described as a degraded genetic inheritance producing something resembling shark skin. The condition worsens with age, and it affects the chapter broadly. Standard Raven Guard gene seed, even mutated, produces pale skin and jet black eyes through melanochrome dysfunction. It does not produce denticle growth. This is a physical deviation with no Raven Guard analog in the published record. Exhibit F is in the mythology itself. The Lexicanum entry for Te Kahurangi states directly that he is said to have been descended from the wandering ancestors, those that went into space at the behest of the Forgotten One. The Forgotten One is identified in McNiven's novels as Arcus Fall, the first Shade Lord, the founding figure of the chapter's lineage. Corvus Corax isn't forgotten. He is named, active in lore, present throughout the heresy canon. If the Carcharodons' founding traditions trace simply to a Raven Guard officer, there would be no reason to call that officer the Forgotten One. You would name him. You would remember him. The only kind of founding figure whose name is systematically replaced with a title meaning forgotten is someone whose real name, if recorded, would trigger a response from an institution that has been policing that name out of existence for 10 millennia. In 910.M41, a single fire-blackened Space Marine strike cruiser emerged from the warp on the outer reaches of the Signax system, transmitting an ancient but still valid Imperial authorization cipher. Its designation was the Levitus Vex. Behind it came an entire fleet. Their commander identified himself as First Captain Tiburon. He offered the loyalist Inquisitor legate Jarndis Frayne a set of notices patent, documents affirming the chapter's rights and titles, issued by several High Lords of Terra and Inquisitors now long dead. No living Imperial official had signed those documents. No living authority had vouched for this chapter in its own era. Tiburon submitted personally to psychic probing and gene sampling by Frayne's staff. He allowed the procedure, presented credentials from dead men, said what he needed to say to enter the war, and said nothing else. The Imperial Armour Volume 10 text records that Frayne's personal involvement has led some observers to believe that he had some inkling of just who and what he was dealing with all along. One of the most senior inquisitors in the region came personally to meet them and vouched for them. Shade Lord Tiberos the Red Wake, chapter master of the Carcharodons, ship's captain of the Nicor, commander of the Red Brethren, his chapter's elite first company of assault terminators. Physically enormous, described as larger than standard Astartes by every account, wearing a pattern of Terminator armor modified to his stature. He speaks in whispers. He directs savagery with the precision of someone who has had a very long time to understand what savagery is for. His weapons are hunger and slake, a pair of artifact gauntlets combining power-bladed talons with mechanized chain blades. Their pattern and manufacture are unknown to the tech priests of Mars. Unknown to Mars. ancient beyond their ability to classify. The tradition whispered within the chapter about these weapons' origin is that they came from the Raven Guard Legion's 18th chapter, a Terran formation that Primarch Corax himself exiled to the Outer Dark after he assumed command of the 19th Legion, the group tasked with carrying the Emperor's light to the Ghoul Stars, who later became the renegade Black Shield force called the Ashen Claws. Weapons from Terran warriors whom Corax sent away, warriors who predated his assumption of Legion command and whom, the logic implies, he didn't entirely trust to remain under it. Whatever this whispered origin story reveals about the weapon's actual provenance, it reveals something unambiguous about the chapter's self-understanding. The Carcharodons trace themselves not to Corax's own gene sons, but to the Terran founding generation that preceded him. That isn't how a Raven Guard successor thinks of itself. The Badab War gave the Carcharodons their major canonical appearance and their most documented behavior. After their initial strikes against the Sigard system, a campaign conducted by breaking from the warp dangerously close to Sigard's sun, splitting the fleet into dozens of striking forces and devastating the system's orbital colonies over days and weeks, the Imperial naval scout vessel, Resplendent Martyr, swept the aftermath and found the entire system littered with wreckage. The text records that much had been deliberately plundered and scavenged, both in terms of gear, resources, and, indeed, human life. Human life. Scavenged. The chapter had returned from the Outer Dark in need of resupply. It took what it needed. The Mantis Warriors, the secessionist chapter assigned to them as a compliance target, were driven to near extermination. Their home domains were systematically stripped, their populations processed, their surviving warriors compelled into a post-war penitent crusade by the severity of what had been done to them. No post-war censure for the Carcharodons appears in any source. After the war concluded, Tiberos collected recruits from the Mantis warriors' devastated worlds, ransacked their hidden armories, and departed. The last recorded sighting marked their fleet ascending above the galactic plane, back into the blackness beyond. The Eastern Fringe, where the Carcharodons operate, lies largely beyond the range of the Astronomicon, the Emperor's psychic beacon that extends roughly 50,000 light-years. Without the Astronomicon, standard Imperial navigation becomes unreliable. Administratum functionaries, gene auditors, inquisitorial representatives, all depend on navigators and astropaths whose capabilities are anchored to that signal. Beyond its range, the light of the Emperor himself does not reach in any operational sense. The Carcharodons patrol the one region of the galaxy from which Terra's oversight apparatus can't conveniently operate. This wasn't an accident of geography. It was a destination. Games Workshop has never explained why the Second Legion was erased. The record offers only this. Both the 2 and 11 legions were active participants in the Rangdan genocide, a massive alien conflict during the Great Crusade, catastrophic enough that both legions were expunged from the roster shortly afterward. The erasure predates the Horus Heresy. It was already accomplished before the war that supposedly defines the setting even began. The pattern of what the Imperium erases tells the annalists something. The traitor legions, Horus, Fulgrim, Lorgar, Mortarion, Angron, Perturabo, Magnus, Kurz, Alfarius, aren't erased. They are condemned, named, their identities preserved precisely because condemnation requires a name. The Imperium keeps the traitors' names alive because the name means something. It means failure, corruption, example. Remembering the traitors serves a function. The lost legions aren't condemned. They are erased. No monument exists that says, here is what they did and why it was wrong. There is only the whole. Erasure isn't how the Imperium handles failure. Failure it can display as a warning. Erasure is reserved for something whose mere presence in the record is dangerous. Not its actions, not its rebellion, but the fact of its existence. The Imperium does not erase failures, it erases truths. What the Second Legion saw, did, or became during the Great Crusade, whether they witnessed something in the Rangdan genocide that the founding mythology couldn't accommodate, whether what they were biologically represented a category the Emperor's project couldn't acknowledge, or whether their gene seed contained something that threatened the entire Legiones Astartes system if it became known. The decision was made to eliminate the concept entirely, rather than condemn it. Now consider what survives in the Carcharodons' biology. A combat condition unlike any known gene seed pathology. Dermal mutations no Raven Guard genome produces. Weapons of unknown manufacture that Mars can't date or classify. An armor with battle honors from before the Crusade began. Either this is the accumulated drift of an ancient chapter spending 10 millennia outside Imperial oversight, or it's what a bloodline looks like when the original gene line has been running without Mechanicus support since before anyone alive remembers it being anything else. There is one more piece of evidence that does not get the attention it deserves. The Pentarchy of Blood, convened by the High Lords of Terra and conducted from 860 to 940 M33, deployed 5 chapters to systematically destroy 11 other chapters deemed Traitoris Perdita, to lay waste to their homeworlds and end what had become known as the War of the False Primarch. The Carcharodons were among those 5. That conflict is now described in the oldest surviving reference to the chapter, the Mythos Angelica Mortis, as a time purged from Imperial history so thoroughly that less is known of it than even the Horus Heresy or the Great Crusade. The Carcharodons were used to enact an erasure operation. Then that operation was itself erased. A chapter that participates directly in the Imperium's own erasure protocols understands, from first-hand experience, exactly how those protocols work. They know what triggers the response. They know what leaves a trace and what doesn't. They know, specifically, that the procedure begins with records. If Tiberos knows what his chapter truly is, and the 1,000-year continuity of deliberate non-registration, the ancient notices patent from dead High Lords, the gene seed tithing gap, the careful maintenance of Raven Guard cultural cover while the biology quietly diverges in ways Raven Guard biology can't explain, all suggest he does, then he also knows precisely what would happen the moment the right Inquisitor read the right gene sample under the right conditions and wrote the right word in a document that survived long enough to be acted on. The chapter's founding mythology speaks of exile as the original condition. The Mythos Angelica Mortis, the oldest surviving reference to them, preserves this. They were dispatched into the outer darkness upon that first day of exile, there to ravage the foes of mankind until their final atonement. Their forgotten one gave them remit unbound, to set about the traitor, the alien and the renegade without mercy, and to harrow them in their places of strength. So began their long hunt. They hunt still. Their forgotten one, not their Primarch, not their founding chapter master by name. The forgotten one, titled, within their own culture for precisely the same thing that the Imperium did to whoever he actually was. The chapter preserves the memory of the connection while concealing the identity. That isn't accident or sentiment. That is operational security maintained across 10,000 years of accumulated institutional memory.
The void removes them from gene auditors.
The irregular tithes deny the Mechanicus enough samples for a definitive read. The scarification records their history in a language only they can interpret. The combat fury and the denticle growths and the unique pathology are displayed openly as aberrant, catalogued as strange, as things that make other chapters uncomfortable, rather than investigated as evidence pointing to an erased predecessor. Strange chapters get filed and forgotten. Chapters whose biology points toward an erased first founding legion get something else. The rogue traitor Basil Horothus encountered a Carcharodons commander during the Angevin Crusade in 322 M39. The commander was, in Horothus's later account, deathly pale of countenance, with blank black eyes and sharp teeth. He spoke only in ancient High Gothic. He requested a tithe of supplies. He refused to identify himself or his men. Then he departed 3 days before Imperial Navy ships arrived, deliberately, precisely, ensuring no one with the authority to question him was present when he left. That isn't the behavior of a chapter captain who doesn't know who he is. That is someone who knows exactly who he is and has spent centuries practicing how to not let it be written down. The Imperium has 998 numbered chapters and 1,000 years of records to prove they exist. The Carcharodons have no number, no founding date, and no father the Adeptus will name. They ask for nothing, they register nothing, and they vanish back into the dark the moment the killing is done. Maybe that's because they're outcasts. Or maybe it's because the last time the Imperium wrote their true name down, it spent the next 10,000 years trying to erase it. The Second Legion didn't die. It went where no one could ask it who it was. If this is the kind of lore case you come here for, subscribe. There's more where this came from.